Welcome to The Prisoner's Dilemma, a show where we watch and talk about the 1960s TV show The Prisoner. I'm Brendan, and with me is an inconvenient person who's threatening to expose my misdeeds. Someone that, sadly, I'm going to have to murder. Matthew.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. There's just one more thing.
Wait,
we were supposed to watch 2 episodes, but in this document I have the notes for 3 episodes. I'm just very confused about that, sir.
I clearly read you in as the murder victim and not as the detective.
Yeah, I know.
Well, awkwardly. Well, also joining us, a strange little detective that won't leave me alone. Nic Tringali, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm very Italian. I am, in fact, so Italian that I just taste cheese everywhere I go.
Wow.
Eat carry around entire bunches of grapes.
Mm-hmm.
That's me.
Two Columbos.
They said it couldn't be done.
You ask one, you want ice cream cone? They both say yes.
One of us only tells the truth, the other one only lies.
No, you don't.
Yeah, you're right. Columbo only lies.
Right. Gosh. So today we're watching Columbo. We're watching
all of it.
Yeah, here's just a real quick bonus episode on the 5-decade-long TV show Columbo.
Yeah. We're recording for 18 hours.
Yeah. It's going to be difficult, and unfortunately, it is required listening. So, we're watching a set of episodes that featured our person of interest, Patrick McGoohan, who, depending on the episode, starred in, helped write, helped rewrite, or directed, or some combination of those things. And is probably I think it's fair to say the TV work past The Prisoner that he is most well known for. He had cast pretty routinely before Danger Man as a goon, a villain in serial television previous to that point. And he had a couple of things that he tried to get going after The Prisoner. After The Prisoner was done, he moved to Los Angeles. He was supposed to star in, or I guess he did star in, one series of a TV show called Rafferty. Have either of you heard this?
Nope.
Rafferty is like, what if you made House MD in the 1970s? Where it's like an ex-army doctor who establishes a private practice and he doesn't have a bedside manner.
Interesting. That doesn't sound very good.
No, it's not. It's not. And he didn't like making it, and he had a really, really bad time. But the thing where he had some success, such success that he received a couple of Emmys for it, that the star of Columbo, Peter Falk, spoke effusively about his experience with working with McGoohan and brought him back several times to contribute to episodes, was Columbo. A show which I've never seen. Have either of you seen Columbo before?
I had not seen Columbo until relatively recently, like a year or two ago, when we just started watching it from the beginning. So really? I've seen every episode up until, I think, almost through the first run, the 70s run. And then now I've skipped around to watch the other McGoohan ones. Yeah, which is, so that's new to me. In a sense, old Columbo is not new to me, but post 90s Columbo, little strange.
Yeah. I've watched a bunch of Columbo. I have not watched it from the beginning. I'm not you have to watch it from the beginning guy, particularly with Columbo, because nothing carries over. Columbo is just an archetype that is unchanged.
I'm not really a watch it from the beginning person necessarily, but I'm also I don't really care about skip lists.
Sure.
And so I'd rather, like, if an episode is bad, we'll just stop watching it.
Fair.
And I would say most of 70s Columbo is like pretty much fine. There's maybe
totally.
a few episodes that are like, all right, that was kind of unsatisfying.
Yeah.
But there's some absolute classics.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, so Columbo started in 1968 and ran through 1978 on NBC. And then, after it was canceled there, got picked up by ABC in 1989 and ran through the beginning of 2003.
Yep.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, there were plans even to do like one final Columbo case. Peter Falk has even like grabbed the script, had selected a script for it, but unfortunately he came down with dementia and soon died not long after that.
That's unfortunate.
It is.
Matthew, can you give us a quick rundown of what Columbo is? Like, what the heck is the format of a Columbo episode?
Sure. So Columbo is like a reverse whodunit, or where we know immediately from the beginning of the episode who is the murderer. We see the murderer in almost every episode. I think there's like a couple exceptions to that where we don't see the instance of the murder. And then the entire episode is basically this little freak named Columbo. He shows up sometimes with a dog, sometimes without a dog, in a terrible car. And he sort of uses the fact that he comes across as kind of like this tramp character who's not very intelligent but well-meaning to let himself supposedly be manipulated by typically these like rich murderers. He's always going for rich people, Columbo is, Praxis. And then he eventually like turns the tables on them, reveals that actually he's this very intelligent guy and he's got them one way or another. Sometimes that's just with a reveal about some evidence, some deductive reasoning. Sometimes it's a cool little sting operation. But every episode basically follows that exact same format.
Yeah, so McGoohan is in all three of the episodes that we have watched today. We were just going to watch 2, but we wanted to watch 3.
Should we say the name of the third one? I don't think we've done that yet.
Give me 1 second, and then I'll get to that. So McGoohan is the villain of all 3 of these episodes, and so part of why I wanted to watch these at all is not merely to say like, oh, here's a thing that McGoohan did that he was also well known for, but here's McGoohan getting a chance to act in a way that takes advantage of the, frankly, kind of ominous presence that we've described him having both in Danger Man and in The Prisoner. It's a great opportunity to see him doing some of the tete-a-tete back and forth conversations, but this time he is the person who the hero is trying to get, not simply the protagonist, right?
The one who is gotten.
Exactly. Yeah. As Walter White famously said. Nick, I should have asked, what is your history with The Prisoner?
I had never heard about The Prisoner one iota until this friend of mine named Brendan started a podcast about it. And I was like, wait, what is this show? Like, the premise alone was like really interesting. And I had already seen Patrick McGoohan in the Columbo episode that we're not talking about, called By Dawn's Early Light. And he's frankly not very good in it, and it's an overall bad episode. And so I was a little bit unsure about The Prisoner, but I started anyway, and I am very early in, actually. I've only seen up to A, B, and C.
Gotcha.
But I am very taken with The Prisoner, for sure. It's interesting, feels out of time going back.
It does,
and watching it now, which I think is really appealing. And I also watched, to prepare for this, I watched a few episodes of Danger Man, which feels very much of its time.
Oh, yes.
And so that has been my McGoohan entryway.
Awesome. Yeah, Peter Falk hadn't ever heard of McGoohan ahead of making that first episode that you were just describing, By Dawn's Early Light, where McGoohan plays the headmaster of a military academy for young boys or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sort of. It's like a weird private military academy. Like, it's not actually the military. It's just somewhere you can send your boys in case you want them to, quote unquote, man up.
Oh, yeah, those do exist.
It's it's strange. It's clearly, so all Columbo episodes are set broadly in LA or Southern California. That's clearly not in Southern California. And it's odd because the motivation is McGoohan's character doesn't want the school to become a co-ed school. And so he just straight up murders a guy who's going to do that.
Well, he doesn't want it to become a co-ed military school. Right?
Oh, is that it? Oh, maybe I missed the non-military part. Okay.
Yeah, because he believes that they're somehow producing the people who will save America.
Yeah. There's some weird politics to that episode. And unfortunately,
not a good one.
It's not good. The structure of the show, or the mystery, is not very good. And I think McGoohan was directed to give a very stoic military stiff upper lip kind of performance. Mm-hmm. And it just comes off as wooden and really flat, whereas in these episodes we're going to talk about, he is way more animated and interesting, and that works a lot better.
Yeah.
Absurdly, by Dawn's Early Light is the first time that a guest star in Columbo wins a daytime Emmy for his performance.
Which is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but I trust my friends more than I trust the Emmys. And so we omitted By Dawn's Early Light from this run. We're only going to watch some bangers. We have watched Identity Crisis, Agenda for Murder, and Ashes to Ashes.
Yep.
Each of which is interesting for its own reasons. I'm really glad that we wound up with this suite of episodes to sort of talk about. Should we just jump right in?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Matthew, can you tell us what happens in Identity Crisis?
Of course. A spy and his handler arrange a meet. The spy goes by Geronimo, but is using the false name A.J. Henderson, and the handler, we will later learn, is named Nelson Brenner. The two spend time at a boardwalk amusement park where Brenner enlists Geronimo to arrange an exchange with an enemy operative, Steinmetz. That night, Geronimo meets with Steinmetz agent, Lawrence Melville, on a beach. The two agree on the exchange details and part ways. No sooner has Lawrence left the scene than Brenner appears and kills Geronimo. Columbo then appears and finds Geronimo's corpse in what appears to be a mugging, though strangely the victim's jacket was removed. He also learns of the existence of Melville from an ex-cop bar owner. Meanwhile, Brenner sneaks back into his office to record a speech and establish an alibi that he was busy writing the speech at the time of the murder. We notably see him hearing about China withdrawing from the Olympics on the radio on the way. A large portion of the episode follows Columbo then picking up the clues to lead him to Brenner, while Brenner attempts to use Melville as a scapegoat. In the process, revealing that he himself is Steinmetz to the audience. After a series of tense meetings with Brenner and one visit with the director of the CIA, Columbo catches Brenner in a lie. He had no alibi since the news of China withdrawing wasn't announced till the morning after the murder.
This episode rules.
This episode is so good.
So, again, I'd never seen Columbo before. This is the very first moment that, despite...
What an episode to start with.
Exactly. Despite social media despite class-conscious Columbo being a hero of the people.
Despite being a cop.
I'd never... Exactly. I mean, he's a detective. Maybe he's just sort of like a guy that shows up.
Yeah, so Brendan,
he's in the LAPD.
What was your osmosis understanding
great
of
question.
Columbo coming into this?
I knew that Columbo acted like a schlub, but was actually very clever. But that it wasn't entirely an act, right? Like, he does love, his dog and his wife and Chili and his stupid beat up car, right?
He's both a schlub and extremely clever and perceptive.
He's not putting on an act. He is just he knows what kind of person he is, and he uses that to his advantage to take advantage of people that will let things slip, that will assume that he's not paying attention, or that he's too dense or too slovenly to really get what's going on. Mm-hmm. I hadn't realized, I think, that it was so LA focused. You can very much tell that this is a Los Angeles TV show here. And I wasn't prepared for how long it would take for Columbo to enter the picture when the episode started, right?
It's like 30 minutes every time.
Yeah, it's cool.
And these are 90-minute episodes, like TV movies, so it's a full,
episode
act of the story that he's not in.
Yeah. Am I right in saying that each episode has its own music? Like, there's not a consistent. The Columbo theme starts playing or anything like that.
That's true. I believe so. I don't know for certain.
So it's sort of true. There is a Columbo theme. It's like
Can you sing it for me?
I think it's actually just like This Old Man. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah, This Old Man. Like This Old Man, he played 6. He played something. I don't remember the nursery rhyme.
Sure.
But basically, Peter Falk during the 70s run started just like whistling it on set. Falk just did a whole bunch of like nonsense that he like brought to Columbo. Like, for example, Columbo's beige overcoat thing is just Peter Falk's coat that he would bring from home. And so he had like his actual grocery lists and stuff when he was like going through the pockets. So he just starts like whistling it at one point. And then when the 90s series comes back, they start just using that as the theme.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I think in the 3rd episode we watched, it comes up. There's an orchestral version of like This Old Man that they use as the Columbo theme.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the whole cadence of the thing I thought was really interesting, and I think that some episodes execute on it a lot better than others, even just out of the 3 that we have watched.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not above saying that I think this first one is probably the best one.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
Easily. The detail I like about the production is apparently Peter Falk would ad-lib a lot of the like fumbling around that he would do, which to intentionally put the opposite performer like out of sync and be irritating, which you can really tell, and not necessarily in these episodes, but with some other stars, you can see the frustration is very palpable, and that was something that was interesting, or that was new to me when I started watching. Is a huge amount of the show is him just being extremely annoying to the guest star, and the performance around a rich person being annoyed by somebody they can't get rid of is very amusing to me. And I think Patrick McGoohan does some of his best work in him being extremely pissed off that Columbo has showed up again.
He seems to be like a housefly practically. There's no getting rid of him. Throughout all 3 of these episodes, he continues to just walk into places, walk into people's homes, be there in the office when he arrives.
He crashes multiple parties. He's always crashing a party.
Totally. I really, really appreciated in this first episode, Identity Crisis, how interesting it was to watch. I thought it was very, very well shot. I think the scenes that they have put together are really interesting. Like most of this first act of the show takes place at a carnival, and then at a nightclub, and then at the beach. And all 3 of those, I think, do a really good job of setting the like 70s LA atmosphere for what's going on here. And I can't remember if you said in the summary, but the person that gets murdered here is Leslie Nielsen acting as the spy Geronimo.
Yeah.
He's outstanding. He looks so good. He
looks great.
This is actually the 2nd time that Leslie Nielsen would be killed in Columbo.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah. He's super well dressed. He's performing really well. I thought the script was really tight in that they don't go out of their way to explain things. They trust that the audience will get what's going on. There's a moment where at the carnival he says, to meet your contact, you're going to use the clickety-clack routine like you used at this operation. And he doesn't explain what that is. And when Leslie Nielsen gets to the bar, he makes a bunch of noise with the cigarette dispenser, which gains the attention of the contact. And it just sort of happens organically. There's no cut in to be like, you see what's going on here? It's elegantly done.
Yeah. I think the script's really good. I think that the directing's really good. I think that like the shot of Columbo when he first appears, where he's sort of like appearing out of a cloud of cigar smoke, right? In like the darkness. It's really good, right? He really feels like an avenging angel or some sort of like unreal thing. I will say that especially if this is like your first interaction with Columbo is like feels a little off model in this episode. I don't know, Nick, how you felt about it, but
In
like,
what way?
There's just some things that feel like a little bit out of character for what I would expect of Columbo, right? Like in the bar, for example. So once he, they find Nick knows what I mean immediately.
Yeah.
Once they find the body, right, they go up to the bar, they talk to this ex-cop, right? So ex-cop is played by Val Avery. And he's talking to them about like there was this, young black guy who was following your person. We mentioned it already, but Leslie Nielsen is playing Geronimo, who's mostly was, probably best known now for as like a comedy actor, right? Because he's in like Airplane and Naked Gun and Scary Movie 3 and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And the young black guy he's talking about there, Lawrence Melville, is Otis Young, who was the second black actor to co-star in a television Western. Anyway, so this ex-cop saying all this, and we have Sergeant Kramer, who's played by Bruce Kirby, there in the scene, who's like trying to get Columbo to pay attention. Bruce Kirby would be like the most common Columbo sidekick character. He shows up like 6 times across the whole series as this character, including in 2 of the episodes we watched, which is fun. But I think he's probably Columbo's most popular sidekick character is actually this other guy named Wilson, who shows up like twice or something, just because he's a lot funnier. But Kramer's desperately trying to get Columbo to pay attention, but Columbo's just watching this lady doing belly dancing.
He's just so horny for this dancer.
Well, he's horny, but he's also super sleepy or something like that. He's very like...
Yeah.
There's the bit at the end where he says, she's shy, because he's like supposedly been thinking this whole time about like what's going on with this dancer and reasoning through in his head. But that's a very weird moment, right? We've seen Columbo in other episodes, like, get into a book on erotic art, or like sort of be bashful around a pretty lady, but like nothing like this. This is really bizarre.
That's true. I think the thing that stood out to me the most about this episode is, at least to me, it's kind of unclear what the motive of the crime is. Like,
what
there's
do you
some
mean?
there's some allusion to money being extracted from South America through there's an incredible line that is oh my goodness, I wrote it down, I can't remember. Oh, double agents don't go broke, which is between, I think, Nielsen telling McGoohan.
Yeah.
But the reason for the kill is not 100% clear, where in other Columbo episodes it's very much like, I'm gonna blackmail you. Oh,
sure.
Well, here's a gun and now you're dead, right? And then we'll get to the end, but the end is also a little bit out of key for Columbo. But regardless, it's really good. It's just a great episode of performances and like locations, and McGoohan doing makeup and all sorts of weird little like side paths.
Yes, some really cool spycraft stuff in this.
Yeah. Just to put it, the other point that really sort of stood out to me is like the weird fat joke he does.
That is weird.
Yeah. Like, Columbo is not a guy who's like mad about people being fat or weird about people being fat. There's even an episode where he talks about how much he loves his fat wife. So like I don't know, it's bizarre.
So I want to talk more about like the plot and Brenner's whole deal, but I want to interject before that, because I noticed right away both of those things. The shot of so Leslie Nielsen gets murdered, and then we cut to, this is again like 20-25 minutes into the episode, the investigation on the beach, where Columbo first shows up, and he comes out of the darkness and he approaches the staff as they're the other cops as they're checking out the scene. And then this other scene that immediately follows, where he's in the bar, he's weirdly kind of sleepy, and he's paying attention to the belly dancer, and he's we're supposed to be impressed by the fact that he's like gleaned this thing from her personality just by watching her instead of talking with her or something like that. Both of those scenes are inventions of McGoohan's.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so McGoohan starred, directed, and rewrote most of this episode when he came on board.
Interesting.
Yeah. I gleaned a lot of this from, I learned a lot of this from an interview with Peter Falk from 1998 with Barbara Pruitt, who is a scholar, librarian, media studies person, wrote a lot about country music, wrote a bunch about McGoohan, and published this interview with Peter Falk about McGoohan on Clark.net, thanks to archive.org for saving it away. So this is talking specifically about Identity Crisis, and it talks a little bit about Agenda for Murder a little bit later. I think Ashes to Ashes hadn't come out yet. Then there's the way you wrote and directed the scene that introduced Columbo to the murder investigation. We had never had a scene in the show like this before. It's at the beach. It's at night. Columbo emerges from the shadows. He's back a bit from the camera. You can just see the cigar smoke. In the foreground is the body, a photographer, and some people making notes. Columbo is very direct and peremptory. He issues commands. You get the feeling that he doesn't want people trampling around the murder scene of the body. Without any attempt at politeness or affability, with no concern whether he's going to be liked or disliked, he gets those people out of here. All business. The one person he tells to remain is the detective who's there. And having issued those commands, he walks over and kneels down next to the sand next to the body. And the detective is also on the sand next to the body. And then in a friendly voice says, "How you doing, Cliff?" That juxtaposition, issuing those commands in silence, walking forward and bending down, and then just saying to an old friend, "How you doing?" is interesting. It makes you like the character. But you've seen a dimension of the character you haven't seen before. It's dramatic entrance, shot dramatically. It's good filmmaking, good writing, good lighting, good directing. Far better than we usually do.
I think that holds true for the episode. Like as far as camera positions and shots and like structure, this is definitely one of the best. Columbo episodes.
The show never failed to impress me with when Columbo is doing his whole shtick where he is like shoving his foot in the door, putting his head in your car, refusing to go away until you answer his questions. Just, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to bother you. I know you're very busy. Just one more thing, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
But it does such a good job of putting the camera in places where it is interesting to see how they have arranged McGoohan and Falk in such a way that it is not just a two-shot of the two of them standing right next to each other having a conversation. There's such interesting arrangements and configurations and stuff like that.
Totally.
Do we want to talk about McGoohan's character in this?
Sure.
Yeah. A consultant? Question mark? I'm not sure. Like the cover is
Brenner is
Mahjong
is a consultant scriptwriter who is also a CIA agent.
Yeah.
Who also seems to have the false identity of the crime lord that he himself is leading the investigation for.
Yep. Yeah, he's playing both sides to the CIA in having the only connection to this local crime lord named Steinmetz, who looks a bit like Albert Einstein.
Right.
And so he's kind of playing both sides for some, I guess, to get money to extract money from the CIA.
It's money.
Yeah. So
his house. Like, come on.
That's the thing.
That's
is that,
true.
like,
yeah, we'll get to that for sure. Yeah,
he has this mansion. Honestly, we see him.
He has staff. He has a chef and several staff members.
Yeah, he speaks to them in a gobbledygook language of all of his own. He's like Willy Wonka with the Oompa Loompas over here.
Yeah,
I've invented my own Asian language. You're required to learn it.
This is why I was surprised, Nick, for you to say that like the motivation is unclear. Like, to me, it seems very clear. He doesn't want. He's supposed to get Geronimo involved in this investigation. He doesn't want to get involved in the investigation. Geronimo clearly is already on his tail, so he's going to kill him before he can potentially figure out the Steinmetz connection. And why does he care about that? Because he wants all the money. he's playing both sides.
So. You're not wrong, but it was, I don't know, maybe I just got caught up just being tickled with Leslie Nielsen throwing out lines like "why all the jazz" and fun, like weird made up spy aphorisms.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not complaining about not fully putting, I guess not fully buying the like money motivation, but
yeah.
He's extremely rich.
Yeah, I kind of appreciated that the focus was on, and you did the murder, and not merely, and here is the whole, I'm going to unravel everything else about what's going on here.
Right.
Columbo has a very, very specific goal in mind. He's going to solve the murder, and anything else that happens around that is hunky-dory by him.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting, consistent characterization of Columbo, right? Where he is hyper-focused on solving the crime, right? There's cases where he gets along very well, and he might even like sympathize with the murderer and the reasons for the murder, but he does not let them go. There's like 2 cases where you can argue that he sort of let somebody go, but both cases have like mitigating circumstances.
Sure.
The thing that I wanted to bring up, talking about Nelson Brenner, is that he's basically dark end number 6 from The Prisoner.
He kind of is, yeah. Say more.
I mean, he's constantly doing "be seeing you," and he's doing the number 6 thing.
He's saying it constantly.
Constantly. He's like, hey, by the way, do you remember The Prisoner? But it's also, right, like, you know, not to spoil things for Nick too much, but we already talked about how, like, a bunch of what they're trying to, the village apparatus is trying to do with number 6 is, like, get him on side, right? And this is sort of like a Patrick McGoohan style spy who is apparently like on side with a global hegemony, right? He's working as a spy. And not just that, he has like, whereas number 6 has all of these ideals and morals and, you know, things that restrict his actions in certain ways, you know, his sense of identity. This guy throws all of that away. He doesn't care about anything. He's very lackadaisical. He's not serious at all. He has multiple identities. He doesn't care about identity that much, right?
He cares about one thing about his identity, and that's that he is cool.
That's true.
He is always dressed to the nines. He's surrounded by beautiful, exotic people. He is the consummate host who is offering you...
Speaks multiple very real languages.
Yeah, but he's offering you like the most expensive wine, the greatest of snacks, showing you the latest... He's got kind of like a... he's got a little bit of a Patrick Bateman kind of vibe to him of like, check out all my toys. Check out all these board games I have from far and distant locations.
And the camera... like frame, like the camera clearly thinks he's extremely cool as well, just in like the background framing and the shot at the gas station where his car just like slowly pulls into frame. It's just and then you recognize whose car it is. There's only one, you know, that's like the coolest car we've probably ever seen on Columbo, which I also found a very enjoyable part of this episode specifically, because normally I would say Columbo episodes are very well done, but pretty straightforward in their like depiction of the murder and the victim or whatever, where this really plays up how just absolutely cool this guy is.
I wonder why the camera would think he's so cool. Wait, who directed this episode?
Gosh. And it's not simply that, but there's so many cool places, right? Like we already gestured at like the lawn party. We talked about his cool mansion. We talked about the beach and this like a nightclub kind of thing. He also Columbo,
a train playground.
Yeah, Columbo goes to a train playground. So really quickly, Brenner figures out that like, oh, there's a cop who won't leave me alone. I'm going to get the power of the CIA to try and deter him. He makes a lot of gesturing at like, I have friends in high places. I really don't want you bugging me. Please don't. Columbo figures out really quickly, oh, someone's following me in this plumber's truck or whatever.
It's so obvious.
Well, before that, it's what's really cool is how like they get this guy's identity. The victim, the Leslie Nielsen, his cover name is Henderson. They like track him around through cabbies and like, oh, he's this like advertising executive guy. Yep. And they go, and the advertising agency's like, well, he's alive. That's not him, and he's alive. Yep. And which is a really great like, oh wow, the you know, who is this guy? Which is a really really interesting mystery. And then he goes. He looks at a lot of photo negatives at the
that's a great
park
scene.
and eventually finds Patrick McGoohan more specifically.
Yeah, there's a lot done, I think. One of the things that is consistent, regardless of the quality of the episodes, is I really, really like when Columbo is just talking to a random person that is instrumental in providing a piece of evidence or something like that. Like, Peter Falk does a really good job of like drawing these people into the scenario and making it clear that, like, look, I'm not going to ask any more of you than I absolutely need to. And there's no reason that this needs to be difficult for either one of us. Just help me out a little bit and I'll get out of your hair. It's such a contrast to the way that he apologetically badgers all of the rich people that he's investigating, right?
Yeah. Just to speak about that scene a little bit more, right? So this is him upon hearing from the bellboy actually at the hotel that this guy, who he at this point thinks is Henderson, went to this amusement park, right? He like talks to this guy who's running this carnival game, and then he talks to this photo stand guy, Cliff Carnell, and that's how he meets Joyce Barbara Rhodes, who had taken the photo of Geronimo and Brenner the day before. And we just get this scene of them going through, because, Brenner had mentioned he was going to go back and get the photos taken care of. But they get this scene of them going through like tons and tons and tons of these photos negatives. And we actually like stay in this scene for a long time as they like go through these photo negatives with like magnifying glasses and stuff. And what I really like about that is we get a look into, and if you're not familiar with Columbo, you wouldn't, necessarily be aware of this, but like we get a look into Columbo's process, right? And how much it's just based on like exhaustively looking through all options. There's this great episode, which is a really silly name. It's like Bye Bye Sky High IQ or something like that.
I saw that one when I was browsing. Yeah.
That's funny. In which like, we get Columbo, who very rarely, I disagree that he lies and that, he's not putting on an act. I think he 100% is. But we get him sort of honestly saying that, like, when he was coming up, he was aware of everybody else who was all so much smarter than him. But he felt like if he could just work harder, then he could still outdo them, right? And we get to, like, see that, like, process in action in this scene. I think it's really good.
Bye Bye Sky High IQ murder case seems to be about a Mensa club.
Yeah, but they call it a Sigma club instead, which is really funny.
That rules.
Yeah, they're a bunch of Sigmas.
I wish I was in the Sigma club.
Well, if you're in the top 2% of IQ in the world, Brendan, you too can join the Sigma club.
Is that what Sigma means?
In this bizarre fictional setting, yes.
That's good. That's good.
It is good.
I'm sorry, Nick, you were saying something.
Oh, I was going to say the entire photo scene, he has a button with his own face pinned to his jacket on it, which is just funny.
I was really hoping he was just going to wear that for the rest of the episode.
Oh my God.
And I kept thinking that he had, except it wasn't. It was just a very shiny button on his trench coat.
Yeah. That's The Village badge. He gets a special one. He's just the Columbo.
Penny farthing.
Yeah. So, I think that we've skipped around a little bit, and we talked about this photo scene. We talked about his first run-in with Brenner, and then, the CIA director, who is played by David White, who also played the boss from Bewitched. One of the things we haven't talked at all about is this bizarre speech, which is like the cornerstone of the episode and how Columbo's going to catch him, right? Yep. So Brenner goes back to his little office, and he records a speech in an Italian accent, which is so funny to me.
And because it's not the reason is because he's writing a speech for a business
Vito Scotti.
Man. Yeah, who is Italian. He is the most Italian person ever existed. But it's not. That's not explained at all. And so at the very beginning, you're like, why is he talking about crushing grapes with his feet? Like, what is going on?
I thought he had a cover identity that was supposed to be a paisan or something like that, right?
I still remember crushing my grandpa's feet, etc. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's very funny, but it's bad funny.
Oh, sorry. It's Salvatore Da Fonte, of course. Salvatore Da Fonte. That's the guy. And it's Vito Scotti is the guy who plays him. He has 6-time appearances in Columbo, but never as the same character. So they were just like, we need someone who's sort of Mediterranean. Let's get Vito in.
Yeah.
Gotta work.
He's great.
Yeah. Yeah, he shows up again later, talking with Columbo. Yeah. And it seems clear that he's like, he's leaning into the Italianness of it in order to make his case, because that's what people expect from him, and so he's playing the part. And he views Brenner like writing the speech to that effect to be a good thing.
Right.
So it seems at least to be like deliberate rather than just a stereotype. At least that doesn't make it less uncomfortable, but.
Yeah, the thing I think was really interesting, right, is that, like, yes, you're right. We have no idea. This is part of what you were talking about earlier, Brennan, about, like, the episode sort of trusts you enough to, like, not explain everything, right? So we get this bizarre Italian accent recorded thing that Brenner does, and then later we get the speech, right? We get him, Salvatore Da Fonte, repeating the same lines. So that's, like, this explanation thing. That's when Columbo and Brenner first have the interaction, where Brenner claims he was just trying to poach Anderson from, like, a rival firm or something, basically.
Why is the CIA agent using a real person's identity?
I don't.
As a cover.
That seems like a really bad and easy lie to get found out in.
Seems that way.
I mean, if he wasn't murdered here, right? We know that A.J. Henderson did do regular trips from New York to Los Angeles and all over the world, right? And he looks somewhat like him. And so if he's not murdered here, any record of him just seems like A.J. Henderson was doing a regular checkup in this area, right?
Yeah,
I don't think it's a terrible idea, but it is, it's mostly for plot convenience.
It is very much.
I admit most of the things that I do are not... I don't consider, but what if I get murdered? Will that turn this into a bad idea?
Yeah.
And I will apologize and change my behavior going forward.
You wouldn't last 5 minutes in the
Columbo.
hot rockin' world of the CIA.
You probably shouldn't start any podcasts. What if you get murdered?
honestly, I'm not going to answer that. No, I would not be a good CIA operative. I would be a very good funeral home director, but we'll get to that later.
So from here, I think, we've already talked about a lot of this episode.
Yeah.
So, Brennan, I interrupted you. I don't know if you were going to jump. I was going to jump us forward quite a bit.
I was going to jump us forward. I was going to say, like, I think the main thing to talk about remaining with this episode is the interactions between Columbo and Brenner, right?
Yep.
Matthew?
No, I was just saying, yep. I agree with you.
No, I agree.
No, I have to now. I see I'm being called on. Okay. Teacher.
Yeah. Matthew, would you talk a little bit more about the interactions between Brenner and Columbo?
Sure. So they have an incredible chemistry.
They're really good.
This is part of, it's a through line through the 3 episodes that we watched, right? Falk and McGoohan, got along in real life, and you can really see that chemistry working well on screen, right? You didn't see it so well in the first episode that we didn't watch, which is part of why I'm glad we didn't watch it. But off screen, they were supposed to be getting along very, very well, which is why we see McGoohan coming back so many times, right? And yeah, the scenes are great. You get a sense, at least from on my perspective, you get a sense that Brenner is genuinely fascinated by Columbo and kind of hopes he gets him. Kind of is hoping that this is the guy who takes him down.
I read it, and I think that's a valid read. I read it more as this, in even more so than all the other rich people who think they're above the law in Columbo. He is doing the most, because he starts out by lying about this whole advertising thing, which he then says, "Oh, I didn't realize." I was kind of, he tells Columbo I was being a little bit, obtuse because I didn't want to be stealing, maybe doing some corporate espionage. And then he says "Oh, I was actually being obtuse about that because I'm in the CIA." And so there's he feels like he's just behind so much protection that he has this, I wrote down, he has this kind of "Oh, my husband is dead? Oh, how interesting," kind of delivery sometimes, that it's just there's just no way you can, this will ever come back to me. Although I do like the, maybe this is the one that will finally topple me idea. Yeah,
it seems like he's excited to have someone to play the game with, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I think the scene when he's playing him the music, so at the very close to the end, Columbo goes to Brenner's house to just be annoying.
He's returning $10.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Yes, because he was loaned $10 after
at the pub.
after an encounter at the gas station, and Brenner offers him a cigar and then like snacks and speaks gobbledygook to his chef, and he puts on music.
That's quite a music box you got there, sir. That must have set you back a few dollars.
Few? Do you like music?
Well, I hear it all the time. My wife is crazy about music.
Really? Classical?
Yeah. Beethoven. What's his name? The guy that wrote Marriage of Figaro.
Mozart.
That fella. She likes rock music, too. When the nieces are around, it's on the air all the time.
Lot of rock. How about this?
That's Puccini. That's Madame Butterfly.
Yes,
That's my wife's favorite piece of music.
I know.
You know. You have my house bugged.
I know. But since the director met with you, I've had it removed.
Just I'm glad my wife didn't know about that.
And Brenner goes, I know. And that has been.
He doesn't say like that. It's so important. He goes, I know. It's incredible.
It's the most that I've seen a Columbo villain go, oh, I'm playing with you interaction, because so often you get the like, oh, well, I'm lying, or you get the murderer positing an explanation for the events that don't add up to Columbo. But I have not ever seen the like, oh, I'm going toe to toe with you because I bugged your house and this is your wife's favorite music.
Yeah.
Which is the standout moment of the episode for me, I think.
Yeah, from that same interview, Falk talks about that scene. He says, in that scene, without ever once mentioning the specifics of the murder, we arrive at that point in the script where both characters know something. And the point is, quote, I know that you know that I know that you know. Unquote. Patrick is a master of arriving at that point without ever being direct. It's insinuated. It's much more entertaining. To me, that scene is masterfully written. And if I may say so myself, it's beautifully played.
It's really good.
I like it a lot.
I had a different Falk quote where he was saying, the scenes between Columbo and the murderer are, in my judgment, among the best we ever did. They have that perfect balance between being both compelling and amusing. And that's what we always strive for. That's the trick in those scenes. Keep them tense and keep them funny. And a great deal of credit for that goes to Patrick McGoohan. I'll always remember how much fun I had playing him. And to this day, I get a kick out of watching him. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about one more thing in this episode, because I think we are towards the end here.
Let's do it.
And that's a thing that Nick brought up before we even started recording, which is the Italianness of it all.
Oh my God.
So part of how Columbo breaks his case is that he befriends, this guy, this Salvatore Da Fonte, right? As like, well, we're both Italian, so obviously you should help each other out.
They're speaking Italian, which,
yes.
So the Italian, Columbo being Italian is a plot note. It's not even a point in other episodes. It's come up every once in a while.
Yep.
But this is like the scene opens with them speaking Italian to each other, and then they transition to English. And it is the most, hey, paisan, you're from the old country. Like, it is very, very played up to an extremely amusing.
They're on the West Coast. They're surrounded by wasps. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
It's particularly interesting, right? Because like Peter Falk was not Italian.
No.
Right? Peter Falk is extremely Jewish. Extremely Jewish, born in New York, right? And it's so interesting that they were just like, well, we're going to completely ignore that and just say this guy's as Italian as they come, right?
Purely because of the name, I think, more than any other character detail.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because Peter Falk did not actually originate the character of Columbo, right?
That's
so
right.
Columbo shows up previously in a movie I forget the name of, and like some short stories. It's actually when they were first, introducing the character's catchphrase, just one more thing. It's because they realized they had written a scene out on a typewriter and they forgot to include some information. So they said, rather than rewrite the scene on the typewriter, which is annoying, what if we have him just come back in the scene? and say just one more thing and then say this extra information, right? So even though Peter Falk ends up sort of embodying Columbo, and in the cultural consciousness, he is Columbo, right? Even though other people have played this character, he's not exactly a one-to-one perfect match for the things that have been established about the character.
There's a funny echo of that with the Columbo statue. Are you familiar with the Columbo statue?
Vaguely, yeah.
I've heard of the statue in Milan, I think.
It's in Budapest.
Okay.
And it seems like it's there because there was a Hungarian politician called Mixka Falk.
Sure.
And they thought, oh, Peter Falk must be related to that person. Columbo will be our hero now. And so they have this perfect life.
There are worse reasons to pick a hero and build a statue for people. So
yeah. It's just, Columbo belongs to all people.
It's true. Man of the people.
Right.
One other quick thing while we're talking about Columbo as a character. Do either of you know that Peter Falk had a glass eye?
No, I didn't know
I
that.
found out about this over the course of watching these episodes, yes.
Yeah, it's why Columbo has that trademark squint, where one eye is a little bit more closed than the other. Mm-hmm. Once you know he has a glass eye, it's super obvious to see, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime he's doing a big-eyed stare at somebody, and particularly when he's like looking around at that point, one eye doesn't move as much, right? But it adds so much to this character to have that as a detail, even though it's not actually a character detail, right? Columbo doesn't have a glass eye. Falk does.
Right. Yeah, I thought it was much more evident in the later episodes, given how much older he is in that context.
Yeah. Speaking of, should we jump to Agenda for Murder? Or is there anything else we want to say about Identity Crisis?
I think this is a fantastic episode. It's probably my second or third favorite Columbo episode of the 70s, and it's great.
I was
good time.
So thrilled with it once it was done. And I thought, that's terrific. I can't wait to see more. Actually, there's one more thing that I will say, which is the delight of when Brenner is finally caught, when the villain is finally caught, and he can finally just sort of drop it and be like, you got me. And Columbo's like, yep, I got you. And then it's like directed by Patrick McGoohan, credits start rolling, right? It's just sort of like there, right? And it works here. But as maybe we'll get to in the future episodes, I realize it's not part of the Columbo formula, but it seems noteworthy that the villains never seem to be like, I'll just kill Columbo.
No,
he's at my mercy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they attempt that.
That is something. Okay, that's what I was going to ask, because something I sort of picked up on when we were starting watching from the beginning is that like it felt like part of the formula that he's like immune from physical threat. And I guess that
is a sanctuary spell.
Does that happen in the 90s?
It definitely happens in the 90s ones.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's one where somebody tries to poison him.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
No, it's funny because I also would call that like an element of the show that. Like a constraint creatively from a screenwriting point of view, and that like it feels more like a game than the two characters are playing.
Like even if it's never going to escalate to him killing a police detective, right? There's never a explosion of, and I would have gotten away with it, or an attempted escape or anything like that, right? Which is fine. It's just noteworthy.
Yeah, totally. So it does happen. So I think that Columbo as a series struggled with how to end episodes.
Sure.
A lot of times it would end like at the moment of the reveal, right? Like as soon as like you knew that he had the character, just like credits roll. But there are certainly cases where people, when they're clearly caught out, will still try to be like, making a case or try to run for it. Even there's cases where they try to run for it.
Okay.
But it's usually because Columbo, the solution is typically that Columbo knows them by that point so well, right? Because every Columbo episode is him getting to know the killer and like extremely well, sometimes befriending them, sometimes just being annoying.
Sure.
That he like knows if they're going to run, and he's just got like other police officers positioned, right, ahead of time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Agenda for Murder?
Agenda for Murder.
Agenda for Murder.
All right. Oscar Finch, a defense attorney, and his friend, Congressman Paul Mackey, meet with President hopeful Governor Montgomery, who confirms Paul Mackey as his vice president pick. Finch reveals his own ambitions to become Attorney General. That night, Finch is called by a Frank Staplin, a corrupt businessman with a history with both Mackey and Finch. Finch prepares at his office before walking to Staplin's home. There, Staplin makes clear he's blackmailing Finch and Mackey for their part in destroying evidence to cover up his crimes 20 years before. He wants Finch to do it again, or he'll tank Finch's chances of becoming Attorney General. Finch kills Staplin, setting up the scene to appear to be a suicide, but leaves behind a piece of cheese he's been nibbling on. Columbo arrives at Staplin's home the next day, where he gives special attention to Staplin's Reggiano cheese and the fact that he was halfway through faxing rude jokes to his wife in Hawaii. Columbo quickly makes a connection to Finch due to the telephone call and arrives at his office to find one parking spot oddly dry, given that it had rained the night before. Columbo doggedly pursues Finch, convinced of his guilt, including grabbing his rained-on suit from the dry cleaners and stealing a wad of Finch's chewing gum from the trash. Finch realizes he's on the ropes and convinces his vice president hopeful buddy, Mackey, to claim to have been the meeting with him the night before, granting him an alibi. But at the California primary party for Montgomery, Columbo confronts Finch, taking him in for questioning. There, he presents him with the chewing gum and the cheese, claims the bite marks match, and arrests Finch. Finch does not respond, but listens to Montgomery's victory speech before turning to Columbo with a mournful, "One bite of cheese."
Do you know how expensive this cheese is? This is $10 worth of cheese that you've just let sit out in the open air.
This is something I meant to bring up in the previous episode, which is the prices of things in this episode. We used to be a society.
I wrote down the vodka cocktail from the nightclub was $1.50.
Yeah,
for a vodka.
And the block of cheese that they have on this desk, you'd buy this at Whole Foods for like $40 these days.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
Ridiculous. Which, I should say, the previous episode was in season 5. This episode is in season 9. It's like 10 years later, something like that.
Yeah, 14 years, I think,
14 years later. Working on another episode of these things. This episode has a couple of really good scenes in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
it just keeps going and going and going and going and going.
Brendan, how do you feel about fax machines and their various capabilities?
There's much made of this newfangled device and how Columbo does not know how it works and desperately needs to ask this morning secretary, "Hey, how does this thing work?" Wow, that's amazing. This episode is quaint in a way that I think the previous episode was not. This is an episode that is all about like, wow, times sure are changing, and with modern technology, anything's possible. The reveal of using the bite marks as like, and here's how I'm going to get you, comes out of like a police magazine of new technologies and stuff like that. Has not been mentioned anywhere in the episode up until this point.
I think that's what really struck me, having not seen any of the 90s Columbos, that the 70s run, it's dated in a sense, obviously, but it has a timeless kind of feel to it. Where this, maybe it's because it's a lot closer to my like actual memory. Yeah, feels like just even the interiors of the houses and the way it's shot, and like these second 2 episodes are in widescreen and not 4:3, feel weirdly a lot more out of place. Also, they're both very old, frankly. Which.
They both just turned 70, I think, or one was 71 and one was 70, something like that.
Sure.
I think that's true of the Ashes to Ashes.
Oh, that makes sense.
I think I read that about Ashes. Yeah, but they're basically
in their
late
60s,
70s.
Yeah. This is 1990.
Yeah. I mean, this is considered one of the stronger ones of the reboot series. Which,
that's unfortunate.
Look forward to that, Nick.
I think this episode has a pretty weak first half, but it once they kind of put McGoohan and Falk together in a room for long enough and really let McGoohan start being like downright like villainous and like acidic in his delivery. Those are all fantastic scenes.
Yeah, he's a much more toxic character, or a much more venomous character in this episode than he was even as the duplicitous CIA agent in the previous one, right? He was at least like affable and easygoing and willing to engage. Here he is very clearly like he's playing someone who is very pressed for time, who will only give this man the few seconds that he can spare and not one bit more, is very clearly a lot more irritated by the fact that Columbo is showing up and pestering him. Much more acidic, yes.
He still has a couple of fun line deliveries. He doesn't have any mahjong, but he certainly says poppycock in a fun way. There's the great scene where Columbo tells him the racist joke, and then he like takes a full like 5 seconds before bursting into laughter.
It's not that funny of a joke.
It's not funny. His reaction is the thing that actually wins the scene for me.
I like you can't shoot a man through the telephone. That's a good line. I can't remember who he says that to.
Yeah.
Oh no, he's explaining to the congressman like why, because the congressman doesn't know that he's being blackmailed until like the 2/3 mark. And so then the congressman is like, wait a minute, you went over there to kill him. And he says, well, you can't shoot a man through the telephone.
Yeah. One of the things that I did really like about this episode is that because of the way the episodes are structured, where Columbo isn't there and then the investigation starts and Columbo is basically there the entire time. And so that really forms that, if Columbo needs to be confronting the villain or doing an investigation or something like that in every single scene, then that really colors the way that the episode is paced. Whereas in this one, I did think it was good that because it's more of a political thriller, there is more of McGoohan talking with his congressman buddy or otherwise trying to figure out like, okay, well, how can I cover my bases in some way that is reacting to this investigation rather than simply resisting. He's changing plans a little bit in the process. I did really like his the scene where he accomplishes the murder. He goes through this very elaborate setup of like,
that was something I was like, this feels like The Prisoner, Patrick McGoohan, when he's methodically preparing the method of murder, basically.
Right. He gathers his own gun. He takes a single bullet out and takes some of the powder out. He wraps it all in foil. He does all this elaborate preparation. He parks at his office and then walks all the way to the house. Once he gets there and actually does the thing, he's completely silent. Again, the episode is trusting you to see that these things are happening and then put them all together as it happens, rather than being explicit about those things.
Totally. We've said him a few times, but just to point it out, so Paul Mackey, the congressman buddy, is played by Dennis Arndt, who was a stage, TV, and film actor. He was probably best known at this point for playing like one-off characters in Supernatural and Grey's Anatomy. He was one of those sort of people in like the 80s and 90s. I
like his performance. He does a good, like, when he meets Columbo and he shakes his hand about 45 times. It's a good, like, sleazy, buttering up politician type. And then as soon as Columbo turns away, his face just reverts back to I wish I could murder this guy.
It's pretty good.
He does great. I also think that the guy who plays Frank Staplin, who is Louis, I'm not sure, Zorek, who also played the Greek restaurant owner in The Muppets Take Manhattan, which is mostly just for me to say. But I also think he's great, right? Like he totally, you can buy that this guy is like this slimy businessman who would also be, faxing rude jokes to his wife that he heard that day.
Yeah.
And have a gigantic block of cheese on his desk.
I mean, I get it.
You get it. You also wish that you could be faxing rude jokes to your wife when eating cheese.
No, I get the cheese part. It's
what
like,
if you had
I see.
What if you had a wife that you could send a joke to instantly, Brendan? What a world that would be.
If only.
That's incredible.
That fax machine. I turned to my partner. I'm like, is this product placement? Because it's going 45 seconds into this. Like, these are the features of a fax machine. You really start to wonder what's happening.
I mean, I guess you had to account for the fact that there was probably going to be a sizable chunk of your audience that didn't know how a fax machine worked, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Columbo is your vector into that.
Well, and that's what's funny, and I think we're definitely going to get into this in the next episode, is the timelessness of Columbo. You know, murder mysteries definitely have a like before and after. Everyone has a cell phone and computers and like data records of when things happen. The 70s run is very much like phone records and tickets of airplanes and like very hard physical evidence. There's a whole moment in this about like, it takes this long for blood to dry. Whereas once Columbo interacting with a computer doesn't compute to me, who have just watched like dozens of episodes of like, the most technological thing being phone records, basically,
or like a programmable like gramophone or things like that, right?
Very analog.
So go ahead, Brennan.
I was going to say both this episode, maybe all three of them, or maybe the other two, but not this episode. But there's a lot of there are instances of McGoohan's characters changing what time it is within the room in order to create a false timestamp of some kind. And, one is him changing a computer desktop time. The other is literally him back in the 70s, like taking his finger and walking the clock backwards manually.
Which is...
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, which is funny because the spy episode has the least amount of like gadgets and like false kind of misleading data and things like that. It's very much just like them two doing things, and he's also the CIA, and the CIA dad would like you to stop, please. Whereas this Agenda for Murder feels much more like a political thriller.
Totally.
In every other sense.
It's the information age for sure.
Yeah.
So the thing I wanted to bring up was, already talked about it before, is Columbo is this timeless character. And obviously, Falk ages, right? He visibly ages during the show. Even in the 70s run, right? He's definitely not as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed by the end of it. But the character never changes, right? He's driving the exact same car. He's wearing the exact same outfit. There's even a funny episode in the 70s run where like his wife gets him a new coat he doesn't like, and he keeps on trying to like leave it places.
And it's a black coat, and it's really strange. The color of the whole, like every frame looks completely weird because he's not in a light color coat.
Not in his beige. And he has the same dog, right? Basset hounds don't live that long.
They do not.
And so that's really interesting, right? In terms of like Columbo in these episodes especially feels like a guy out of time, right? He feels like this like immortal or fey being who like happened to wander into like this house and is like having technology explained to him for the first time.
It was very disconcerting watching basically the exact same person teleported 15 years into the future and having to like grapple with all of these things without apparently having learned anything or
no change in between.
Evolved. Yeah, just, go ahead.
No, I was going to say in the 70s, the character has a kind of like someone you would see on the street and not give a second glance to. He stands out when he goes to a rich person's party or he's at like an embassy or whatever, but it feels very set in place. And then in the 90s, he feels like a character brought to the thing, and that really jumps out. In comparison.
No one is wearing a trench coat like that in in 1990.
No, everyone
LA.
else is dressed very normally. Like, Patrick McGoohan is in modern suits and driving a normal, like, of the time BMW. And
it looks like a West Wing character.
Yeah, and Columbo is still in this Peugeot that really looks like they've completely replaced everything but the outer shell of this car at this point, because it is very rough looking.
Yeah.
There's one
scene...
He
has a cousin who does it or something.
Cousin.
His brother-in-law.
Paisan. There's one scene that I think that discrepancy between those characters and the way that he is portrayed really, really works well, which is not the first time that his and McGoohan's characters sort of trade off, but I think the second, where he's in the empty ballroom where the primary is going to take place, and it is completely dark except for this square of light in the very center of it. And both of them are at opposite sides of it. They are basically still doing this sort of like figuring out what the other is all about as they try and exchange information about, like, you got this call from this person. What did he sound like? What was he doing? It's here that McGoohan is trying to, or excuse me, that his character Finch is trying to sell that, like, oh yeah, the crime lord did call me, but he sounded desperate. He sounded like he was on the verge of suicide. Maybe I should have listened to him a little bit more. I guess it's too late now. That sort of thing, which will eventually be juxtaposed against these dirty jokes that I guess he was faxing to Hawaii because they could not wait. But yeah, again, I think the
ballroom scene is great.
Yeah, really, really well staged. Even if, again, the rest of the episode past that can't quite hold up to that level of drama, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I will say I think I like the reveal, like the gotcha moment in this episode better, honestly, than the previous episode. Because the previous episode, he basically gets somebody to airbrush a photo of McGoohan that was clearly already airbrushed to make him look bald, so that he now looks like Steinmetz. And then he's like, and you had information in your speech you couldn't have had. Like,
it's extremely circumstantial.
It's wildly circumstantial. There's no reason for this to be like, and now we can take this to a jury and you're going to be tried, right?
Yes.
In this one, now, forensic dentistry is bunk science. It's not actually consistent. You can't do this thing with the bite marks. He's saying that he can. But in the fiction of the show, I can believe that you can do this. And so the fact that, like, they grab the cheese, they make so much effort to bring your attention to the cheese, right, early on. And then they, like, show Columbo stealing gum out of this guy's trash, right? Like, they set up for the reveal a lot better, I feel like. And it actually makes sense why at least Finch would believe he'd been gotten here and would actually just be like, okay, yeah, you have me.
I think I disagree. I completely am with you that Identity Crisis, the evidence is like weak beyond comprehension, but the play, it really feels like right up until the very end in Identity Crisis, you just don't know, like, how is he going to unravel this, right? Whereas it feels more so in Agenda for Murder, like there is a piece of physical evidence that you just haven't noticed yet, and it's going to come out, where the Olympics, the Chinese pulling out of the Olympics is such like a subtle but completely invalidating piece of information, and then the way McGoohan reacts to it, I find more interesting, even if it is completely impossible from an evidence point of view. Also, the cheese is just like so outrageous that I was just like, oh, my note is like, are you fucking kidding me with this cheese? Which is fine. I think it's purely just I prefer the construction of it better in Identity Crisis.
I feel the same way, and it's entirely because of who McGoohan's characters happen to be. I think the fact that this CIA operative overlooked the timing of this news about China, and that was his downfall, is a lot more convincing to me than someone who is in Agenda for Murder supposed to be an incredibly competent lawyer, who you know is basically like being told, like, hey, here's this new science and I stole some of your gum without a warrant, I guess. Also, the bit where he gets the gums is entirely circumstantial. It doesn't feel like or not circumstantial, but opportunistic. It is not like the result of hard work that he happened to land on that, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, so I get the sense in this episode, and it's a common thing in Columbo episodes, and you even see it in the next one, right? Really clearly, that Columbo knows in his gut who the murderer is.
Oh,
Yeah,
without a doubt. He knows.
That's true in every episode, I think, more or less.
Almost every episode. There's some episodes where he's briefly on like a wrong trail, right?
Sure.
Before he'll correct himself. And so he's just really looking for anything he can use to like tie him to this. So I fully believe that like he went in there knowing he was going to yoink some gum out of this guy's desk.
Sure, maybe.
And honestly, this scene where he like has an arrest warrant and like he's got some other policemen there, it's more police work than Columbo often does.
Sure. Yeah.
Warrants are pretty rare in episodes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sometimes he'll just like put someone in a situation where they're going to like prove they did the crime, and there's like no other police anywhere nearby.
Well, I find that really honestly appealing because I grew up, you know, in the Law and Order CSI mode of a police procedural is very procedural in the like mechanics of how police and like attorneys operate, where this is just kind of a mystery, and he has a badge that means he can't be like thrown out of the scene, you know, immediately, and that's kind of it. It's rare that like policing is accurately described.
Sure.
Apparently that final scene was another McGoohan rewrite.
I mean, I do really like the one bite of cheese, right? Just mournfully saying that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I like how both these go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I like how both of them end kind of, they're together, they're sort of quiet, and McGoohan is lost. And I think both times that moment lands for me.
Shall we see if it also lands in Ashes to Ashes?
One more thing, really important.
Like the TV man.
Like the TV man. There's a police technician who shows up in one scene during the California primary party.
Okay.
We just see his face for just a minute. That one man is Kirk Thornton, who is Shadow the Hedgehog's voice actor.
Okay.
That rules.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out before we got on to the next one.
Which Sonic the Hedgehog character would Peter Falk best inhabit?
Oh,
I don't know any Shadow the Hedgehog characters besides or Sonic the Hedgehog.
He should probably be one of the Chaotix. They're detectives.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
I think he'd be a good Enzio, who's the chameleon.
I think Big the Cat is big Columbo coded.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, with that, shall we go on to Ashes?
Lay it on us.
All right, it's a long one because I didn't have much time for it. We meet Eric Prince, undertaker to the rich and famous in Hollywood, as he prepares for the funeral of war hero and movie star Chuck Houston. He receives a call from Verity Chandler, a Hollywood gossip TV reporter. The next day at the funeral, Verity makes her appearance, kisses the corpse, and appears to leave. But to his surprise, Prince is accosted by Verity in the funeral's parlor's morgue. She claims she can prove that he stole a diamond necklace off the corpse of movie star Dorothea Page 20 years before. Prince immediately kills her and stashes her body. After the funeral service, he cremates Verity's corpse instead of the war heroes, but not before removing her hat, earrings, shoes, and purse. After the cremation, Prince enters Verity's home and lays out her things as if she had gotten home and got to work, pouring some scotch and marking the rim with lipstick. He adjusts the time on her computer, replaces her story about his thievery with one about celebrity cocaine use, and trashes the area by her front door to give the appearance of a kidnapping. The next day, Columbo is brought on to what appears to be Verity's missing persons case. He seems at first unenthused, but burns with rage that Verity's puppy has been fed the night before. This sets him off on his usual crusade. He finds the note PHSB in Verity's day planner and discovers that someone stole a photo of a fancy house from her desk. At the funeral home, he finds evidence in the form of a handkerchief used to wipe off her kiss from the corpse and the fact that the shade doesn't match the one on the scotch glass. Prince, meanwhile, works to clean up the remaining loose ends. He receives a miracle in the form of a recently widowed Mrs. Lurby, whose husband blew himself up in a gas boiler explosion. He offers to cremate the pieces and scatter the ashes in the ocean. He then squeezes the remains of the two different people into a box, war hero Houston and Houston's corpse, to dispose of their ashes together. With the help of taxi driver Eddie Fennell, Columbo realizes PHSB means Photograph Sunset Boulevard, leading him to realize the photo was the mansion of Dorothea Page and to eventually piece together what Verity's true expose was going to be. By this point, he's convinced Prince is the killer, but he has no proof. In a classic Columbo sting operation, Columbo books the widow of Chuck Houston, Liz Houston, for illegally scattering what she thought were her husband's ashes over the Hollywood sign. He also grounds the helicopter carrying the supposed ashes of Mrs. Lurby's husband. Columbo then pulls from the ashes a stainless steel implant from Chuck Houston's leg. The episode ends with Prince laughing and voluntarily entering police custody. Do funeral homes have helicopters on standby, or is this like a Hollywood thing?
This has got to be a like lifestyles of the rich and famous kind of thing.
I guess
right?
so.
It's like it's so much.
He's Undertaker of the Year. Yeah,
I have so much to say about that. I will say, so I watched both of these episodes with my mother. Mm-hmm. My wonderful mother, who's been watching all of The Prisoner again with me.
Mm-hmm. Shout outs.
When we were done with Agenda for Murder, I was like, well, that wasn't as good as the first one. Maybe I'll look up what the best Columbo episodes were. And she was like, no, you better watch the other McGoohan one and get this out of your system. And so we watched Ashes to Ashes. And then I told Matthew and Nick, hey, I watched Ashes to Ashes. And then bless your hearts, you both also watched it. Mm-hmm. And I will say, I don't think this was good, but I think I was more entertained than I was for Agenda for Murder. It's very silly, but it's also pulpy in a way that I think is at least like it has more energy to carry it forward.
I agree with you. I really didn't like this episode.
Why didn't you like it?
I don't know. Maybe it's just because it's like in the 90s and he's using computers, like all the things we just talked about.
Mm-hmm. So the last episode, sorry to interject. The last episode was 90. This one is 1998. So we have jumped forward another 10 years.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's a lot of little things that are not totally under the show's control. Like the lighting and general production feels very much like a Hallmark movie or just like a pretty bog standard TV movie. I was like, it works, but I was not really engaged in it at any point, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Like there's a few... There's some good interactions between McGoohan and Falk, and those definitely are the highlights, but overall it was like, okay, it's a Columbo episode in kind of in shape and form, but not in soul, maybe.
Fair. Matthew, what did you think of Ashes to Ashes?
It's not a good episode. So some like outside history stuff, right? So like by this point, the Columbo revival was sort of on its last legs, right? The show was not hitting the numbers that ABC, I think, wanted it to be hitting. And so because of that, it was already like, ooh, I don't know how much longer we have of this. I think that's a big reason why the episode has so many weird little bits. Like there's musical numbers and tap dancing, right? They're really trying something here. There's the weird chic.
There's the
what's up with that?
Yep. There's a chic.
So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And I think even bringing Patrick McGoohan back was like an attempt to like reclaim, something that was happening earlier.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really rough is you can definitely see how much more aged, particularly Falk is at this point, right? Like McGoohan would still be doing stuff for the next like 4 years or something after this. Mm-hmm. He, in 2002, he was Billy Bones from Disney's Treasure Planet, for those who remember. But like Falk, he's screwing up line reads, right? Much like how I screwed up parts of my summary there. I think you can clearly see like the beginnings of, what will become dementia or like the spark of age, sort of hitting. And that's just rough. Like that's just rough to see. So yeah, not a particularly good time with this ep, I think.
Sure.
It also feels, and I'm definitely speculating here, but it feels like an episode assembled out of better Columbo episodes because like they've done movie stars and like famous people, and they've done let's say, people from the Near East or Middle East or whatever in variously bad ways. But it's kind of like, well, let's try, and it feels like they're really trying to pack in Columbo, like unique Columbo things, right? But the core of it, which is him being annoying and him being clever and him interacting with the guest star, I think it just doesn't really come together, or maybe it's not given enough room for them to breathe and kind of get to it, or who knows what happened on the day.
There's a very weird feeling of a script from 20 years ago that got resuscitated with this, where it's like all of the Hollywood stuff is revolving around this like black and white silent film to talkie kind of era,
which they've done before. They've done and there's been an episode around a
great episode
silent film, fantastic episode, and that's also like, okay, let's bring that back.
Sure,
a little bit.
Well, that makes sense as a topic for a film or for a Columbo episode in the 70s. It's 1998. Exactly. It feels like if they're gonna have like classic Hollywood stuff, it would be stuff from the 60s and 70s, and yet it's like there's a tap dancing number here. That doesn't land.
Yeah, it really feels like they were losing confidence in the format.
Sure.
Right? That like modern audiences, modern in 1998, were going to like this format. And I think that's part of why like they're playing with it in all these different ways, and it doesn't really work super well.
Mm-hmm.
I get the feeling, and I don't know how much more 90s Columbo I'm going to watch, so I don't know if I'll be able to validate this feeling, but I get the feeling that part of the timelessness of the 70s is that the audience of the show was basically everybody. Like if you're an adult or a teen, you can follow along, you get this. And the audience for the 90s, in the explaining how fax machines and computers work, feels much more like, oh, you are Peter Falk's age and you don't understand how a fax machine works, which, I mean, I barely understand how a fax machine works. So
but the idea of like getting an email because you put an email in your advertisement that then goes to your phone, becoming like a plot important like clue. Requires like a lot more like screen time than it would otherwise. Like, I checked the phone records.
It doesn't feel like I'm in the age group of the intended audience for these two episodes. Which, that's the decision that was made, I guess, or maybe I'm reading into it. Who knows? But yeah,
I mean, I think it's definitely that. I think that they're really struggling. It's a classic thing that older series struggle with is like how much are they playing to the older fans? How much are they trying to bring in newer fans? Right? I think there's at least two other really good 90s Columbo episodes from my memory. There's the Columbo Goes to College, which I think actually does a pretty decent job of like. I'm going to try to appeal to newer, younger people in this episode. And then the Funeral of Mrs. Columbo, I think is a really good, like, for old heads Columbo episode.
Sure. There's also a bunch of, like the initial set of clues here run the gamut between, like, pretty intelligently thought out and otherwise, like, confusing. Like, he does a pretty good job of going, like, there's lipstick on this glass that McGoohan's character set up.
Right.
And it doesn't match. And he takes a little bit too long to like really get there, but he pulls in this other character of Liz Houston to like make the case for him in a way that is interesting. But then there's this note of PHSB in the planner, which no one has ever like made a note to themselves of going to a particular address without writing down what the address is in order to go photograph this one house, which I didn't understand if the house was there to like lord it over Prince when she confronts him in the mortuary, or if it's part of the thing that she needs for her show or something like that.
I think it's the show. Yeah.
Because it was, I guess, of a time where you couldn't just Google, I need a picture of this house, and I get that picture, right?
It's also why she needed to grab like a photo of Prince, right?
Sure.
From the brochure to be able to show it to somebody else. You can't Google image search.
Yeah.
So the whole conspiracy is Prince is this funeral director for the stars, which seems like, I'm sure that exists, but seems like a very kind of convenient assembly of things for this specific episode.
Yeah,
sure.
It's like an idea that I create when I'm writing a Spire adventure.
Yes, exactly. He's very like DM had 5 minutes to come up with a character and needs to bridge point A to point B.
Right.
And anyway, so what he does is when stars die, he steals things from them.
Just
and
the one time, I think.
No, he's done apparently. I think he's done it more because I wrote down the quote "telltale traces of homosexuality" that he can derive from dead stars, and then sells this information.
Yeah, he's selling information, not items, right? So he's selling information to the gossip columnist or gossip TV show star reporter Verity, right? Which is also where like they were previously hooking up.
And so the diamonds was a one-off.
That was a one-off thing because, like,
I understand.
Just selling information would not be illegal.
Yeah, I had the same conclusion that you came to, Nick. Of like, oh, they're calling such attention to the Purple Heart. He's going to steal that and sell it or something like that. But no, it turns out that it's not that. It's nothing so interesting as that. It's just this one thing that he did one time.
Yeah, in order to finance his apparently like empire of funeral parlors.
He's a funeral magnate.
Yeah,
I mean that's a thing. They're like big funeral is like a consolidation thing.
It's true. It's true. But you know, this is not explained super well.
Right,
for sure.
Now I do like having a mortician bad guy who's got to like throw his bodies into the oven.
Yeah. He's so strong.
Yeah, he's definitely lifting those bodies himself.
No. I even like obviously Patrick McGoohan is not lifting up these entire people, but in the fiction he is.
Yeah.
And so he must just be like deadlifting 400 pounds off screen to lift these people in and out of like gurneys and coffins and ovens. And
I hadn't realized how long it takes to incinerate a body.
Big things, bodies.
I guess so.
And it takes a lot of heat.
I would just make it hotter.
Oh, this is smart. Yeah.
Well, you'll blow your gas jets out.
Nobody ever talked to Brendan about this. So I do think that like the location is cool.
Yeah.
Right. So like you're talking about, Nick, that like, bringing up like movie stars and stuff is a classic Columbo thing. But like there's never been a funeral parlor like location for a Columbo episode before. So that does.
I think it's a good starting point for sure.
Yeah. It gets you some cool little bits. Right. And like, you know, you're both talking about like everybody's having to explain technology to Columbo. Right. But this actually happens in the 70s series all the time. It's just that like in the 70s series, it's not technology that like us three are very familiar with and like would know how it works. Yeah. Right. Like email.
That's true.
It's instead like, oh, I'm going to tell you about how, you know, wine preservation works. I'm going to tell you about like how does photography work, right? Like things like that. And he would still use this like technical knowledge to be able to solve the case, right? And there's a bit of that here in terms of like understanding, oh, okay, what's the cremation process look like? He like gets the little like tour of the morgue type thing, and all that stuff. So, you know, it's not completely distinct. I think the problem is really this like conflict in the audience of like an audience that isn't going to know what a fax machine is and an audience that is.
Yeah.
Well, I think the difference is the fax machine doesn't relate to the murder barely at all. And it seems like a really odd, significant diversion. Whereas, yeah, you're right. Like most episodes do have, not most, but like a fair amount will have like, oh, this is how... You know, when Johnny Cash skydives out of a plane, he goes and gets an explanation of how much fabric a parachute needs to slow you. And like this whole thing, but that is very much like because Johnny Cash broke his leg, and then so on and so forth.
The scene where
write that down, Brendan.
The scene where in this episode where Columbo says, "I figured this thing out with email. I think you did it," in the chapel, and McGoohan's character is like, well, do you have any proof of that? And he's like, nope. And then he just sort of walks away. And Prince is like,
are you still there?
Hey,
so good.
Where did you go? And like knowing that Peter Falk was also like old and on the verge of dementia kind of colors that badly. But in the moment, it was very like, what's happening here?
They just cuts to his car, like just out there. It's so good.
Yeah.
What do we make of McGoohan's character in this episode?
I mean, he's quite similar in many ways to the last episode.
It is
type guy.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much.
He's very austere.
Given what you've described as like trying to like play the hits in a way to try and like drum up excitement for, hey, it's Columbo, remember your favorite. Like I can understand them being like, yeah, let's just kind of do a rerun at Oscar Finch again.
Yeah.
I don't see much new or interesting, which sounds kind of, I think, meaner than I mean it to, because I think McGoohan does a good job. But between Identity Crisis and Agenda for Murder, they're like, these are distinct characters with like weird little foibles, and this is like, it's Patrick McGoohan. Sometimes you get like a weird little cadence or mannerism or whatever, but it's I don't have much to say, unfortunately, even though I do enjoy him in the episode.
He is shacking up with the widow of Chuck Houston, which is
it's pretty good.
I wish there was more made of that, I think. But
well, so we also know that he used to be shacking up with Verity.
That's
so
true.
I think
That's true.
that Prince's primary characteristic is he's horny.
Yeah.
That's probably fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Columbo has a line saying, "You counseled her right up until the morning, huh?"
Yeah.
Which is like,
that's good.
Yeah.
Which, you
that's
know,
good. That's
knowing,
good line.
knowing what we know about McGoohan, that's an interesting character choice, right?
Mm-hmm. Whereas like Finch, right? Like I think there is some distinctness in terms of Finch is like super sexless, right? He has this wife. We didn't mention it, but she's briefly in there as it's played by Penny Fuller, who was like Emmy winner for playing Madge Kendall in The Elephant Man. Yeah.
I thought she was maybe one of the weakest parts of that episode.
Yeah, but she's like, there's no interaction there. There's no chemistry there between them.
No.
And like he's super, like every moment of every day is scheduled out, right? Which is distinct from this character who's, very prompt, who's like, thinking about timing, but it's much more lackadaisical in terms of like every moment of the day. When he's off, right? There was a bit there, one of his assistants is like, "Oh, I was going to call you at home." And he's like, "Well, I wasn't at home, actually." Right?
Yeah, he seems to get on well with his cast of employees. He's got this priest that seems to work for him as part of like the eulogies and stuff like that.
Pretty good. One of them was played by his daughter.
That is correct.
The assistant.
Yes. Catherine McGoohan, one of his daughters.
Sorry, McGoohan's daughter, not the character's daughter.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So there's a little bit there, but yes, it is very much same old.
Right.
I do want to mention one other thing specific about Eric Prince,
please.
This guy, which is that they style him to look like Steinmetz from the first episode.
That is really funny.
It's really funny, right? And I think it is part of like playing the hits, but it's also like we imagined you'd look like this in like 20, 30 years, and here we go. We're going to make you look like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
I do like his double-breasted, like, all-black suit, though. He looks like he is dressed to be the Undertaker who is there to charm the widow.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of Undertaker, let's talk about the Mortician of the Year awards.
Oh my God.
For he's a jolly good Undertaker. That's nothing. It's nothing.
If that was the band that they got to honor me for my career, my skeleton would
stand up.
My skeleton would burst out of my skin and run out of the room. It was, as the kids say, cringe.
It was cringe.
Yeah.
It
wasn't even like 90s cringe. It was like beyond 90s level.
It was very
like,
strange.
Yeah.
And he seems to be surrounded by like a cadre of flamboyant top hat wearing young Undertakers.
The whole thing is well, if you're in the business of being an undertaker or cemeteries or whatever, you just have to spend every waking moment of your life being happy and going to parties and getting drunk and hitting on waitresses.
Harassing the bartender.
Yeah. And sure, but it gets aggravating extremely quickly.
It's not fun to watch, right? Like
no, it's pretty unpleasant.
In the other moments where we see Columbo like interrupting something and being like sort of an unexpected guest, but someone who is sort of charming as a bumpkin can be, right? Like these are these moments of like, oh, there's an uncomfortable thing happening here, but we're all going to go with it. Whereas these are these moments of like even accepting Columbo. There's a sense of like no one wants this to be happening right now. And that's the joke, right?
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, like, I don't quite get the sense that, like, what's his name? Patrick McGoohan's character, whatever his name is like, Eric Prince is, like, particularly, like, irritated with Columbo's presence. It seems very much like, well, the character's in the scene, and so we're going to play the scene, and there's not much to it. Where compared to variously in Identity Crisis and Agenda for Murder, like, though those two characters dealt with being extremely annoyed at Columbo's consistent return in, like, different interesting ways. And I think the partying, basically the ballroom partying scenes, felt like, well, we're just here now, and there's other things happening, and it's fine. We're just kind of run through it in that sense.
Yeah, Verity is a missing person for much of this episode, which I think colors like the investigation, right? Like, Prince isn't being investigated in connection with a murder yet, and so he's able to play it a lot more calmly. That's true.
But even when Columbo straight up says, like, I think this is a murder, Prince feels like completely secure, right? Because there's no body, there's no direct, physical evidence to actually link him to this crime, to the point where, like, he has tea with Columbo, and, like, they're straight up just saying it to each other, right? Like, Columbo's like, yeah, I think you did it. I can't do anything about that. I'm going to arrest somebody tonight, though, by the way, right?
Fascinating.
And like, this is, I mean, it's a really interesting dynamic for, like, a killer in Columbo to have, right? To just be directly, there's no, pastiche. There's not, nobody's playing anything here. They're just honestly talking about the fact that, like, this is the truth, but there's nothing you can do about it, apparently.
It's like an inverted Death Note.
At some point, we do have to talk about it. We might as well talk about it here. All of the, like, Columbo goes after Kira edits that exist. Have you seen these?
No, of course not.
This is one of the most common forms of modern Columbo fan art.
Oh, great.
Is Columbo, what if Columbo was in Death Note?
Sure.
Wow.
And
I
think
it's such a capacious place.
Yeah, I was maybe going to talk about this towards the end, but, like, one of the things about Columbo is because he's such an unchanging guy, right? Like, he literally doesn't change for 20 years. He is an archetype, but he slots into other series so easily.
Oh,
right?
Sure.
Like, Columbo doesn't do crossovers. There's no crossover Columbo episodes, but it's really easy to imagine Columbo just showing up in one of your, like, television specials, right? For some ongoing series. Anyway, so I think there's a few other cool things in this episode besides just, like, the sort of interesting back and forth at the end. I think there's actually some really nice, or some really interesting, like, guest talent in this episode. So Eddie Fennell, who's the taxi driver, right, is played by Ron Masick, who was in Murder, She Wrote as the sheriff of, like, the town where the Murder, She Wrote lady works, Angela Lansbury. But he was also, Brendan, in Ice Station Zebra, which is the McGoohan film, right?
That's right.
We already mentioned the thing about McGoohan's daughter, right, is in this one, which is fun. Fun to get to work with your kids. And then Mrs. Lurby, right, who's just basically there as, like, a comedy, side thing. And I think she does a fun job as, like, somebody who's just, like, so done with her husband, right?
Yeah, literally was divorcing him right before he died.
And he inconveniently died, and now she has to deal with the proceedings.
Right.
Yeah. So this is Edie McClurg, who was supporting actress in films like Carrie. She's Grace from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right?
Yep.
So she's in a bunch of stuff. So anyway, and then I was going to mention the Awards Bash singer, the really cringe guy, is Ken Weller, who's the producer on Wheel of Fortune.
What?
Yeah, I know. I don't know why he's here.
He should stick with his day job.
I think you're right.
Anyway. So there's a bunch of interesting little talent in this episode and a bunch of, like, interesting little scenes. Most of them work pretty well. The Chic one is awful, but what are you going to do?
Just not do it from the beginning.
Yeah, I think so.
There's one other fun little note here. Luella, I think they pronounce it Luella, the puppy's name, is probably named after Luella Parsons, who was, like, a golden age of Hollywood gossip columnist. And then how could I forget Verity herself? She's a Golden Girl. Verity is Rue McClanahan, who is one of the Golden Girls, right? And she's great. Verity's fantastic.
I think she's the standout performer in this because she is like the classic just bitchy gossip columnist from LA that is just an archetype at this point. And when she arrives at the funeral home and like confidently walks straight up to the body and kisses it on the cheek.
So good.
And then you don't see what happens, but then you see McGoohan or Eric Prince signal to his daughter, the assistant, to like clean up. And then the camera reveals this giant lipstick smear on the cheek.
That's pretty darn good.
Which is, it's good. She does a great job.
She does.
She does.
In this episode.
And she adds some depth to the character in terms of like, this is clearly a revenge plot, right?
Yeah.
Like Prince broke it off with her, and so now she's going to break him, right?
I like it.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
There's one other, if we're sort of done with the episode, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about.
Please.
Which is talk about, we've mentioned it a few times of like, Columbo has this timeless quality. Columbo is this archetype. Columbo is wildly popular. Like still wildly popular.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I think that's really interesting.
To be clear, not I can't believe it, but just like
no,
it's wild just how wide ranging his fame is.
Yep. And I think that's really interesting in comparison. Like this is a Prisoner podcast.
It is,
right? And so we can talk a bit about like, why is it that this show has this like incredible long-standing popularity in comparison to The Prisoner, right? And one of the things I think is really interesting here, and this is at least my take, and I'll start here, and you all can, reject what I'm saying or say your own thing, etc. Is that Columbo is such an archetype, right? Every episode is the same episode. If you've seen one episode, you've seen all Columbo, basically.
Yeah.
Right? There's no story outside of this. There's like no plot lines. He ages, but he never changes.
He doesn't have a Moriarty that he's going after.
Not even that, right? We never see his home life, right? We never even see, like, he has kids supposedly sometimes. He lies about his family all the time, so who knows? But sometimes he mentions kids. And we never talk about them growing up or anything happening with them, right? So he's like this unchanging thing. And that makes it really easy, again, to, like, slot him into something else. Or, like, you see some fan art and you're like, yeah, I get it, right? And I think that's really interesting in comparison, just to finish the thought real quick, with The Prisoner and Number 6 and Patrick McGoohan, who people talk about as if, people talk about The Prisoner as if every episode there's an escape attempt, and every episode he foils a number 2 and so on and so forth. But I think it actually does have like dynamism and changes, right? Like Number 6 changes as the plot progresses. We've talked a lot about that on this show. And I think that's part of why, like, he's just not mimetic in that same way, right? He's not iconic in that same way. You can't take Number 6 from the show and plop him somewhere else, because Number 6 at the beginning of the show is different than Number 6 at the end of the show.
Right.
And I just think that's really interesting in conversation with Columbo.
I think a lot of this stems from episodic versus serial.
Totally.
Where I think when you're sitting down to, or at least when you're composing something like Columbo and you're saying, okay, we're going to follow the formula in some way. And we are not restrained necessarily by continuity or character arcs, or even season arcs, right? Like there isn't an ongoing mystery that started in episode 1 that we need to add some sort of conclusion to in the final episode or the penultimate episode or whatever. That means you really just need to be concerned with the thing that's in front of you, right? Like in all 3 episodes that we've just watched, we were able to assess them completely independently from one another, above and beyond that they happen to share a couple of actors and framework, right? Like there's nothing about Agenda for Murder that informed the events that take place in Ashes to Ashes. It might as well be a completely different timeline. And so because the stakes are so different there, right? Like it's a lot easier to say like, oh sure, I like Columbo because there's so many other ways. There's so many opportunities for you to get in and enjoy the thing. Whereas if you're watching something like The Prisoner or Lost or Deadwood or later seasons of Law and Order, where it becomes more about an ongoing story, you have to start, you have to have a middle, and you have to stick the landing, right? A season of Columbo never needs to worry about, and we're going to wrap up this storyline. They just have to have a good last episode. And that makes it a lot easier, I think, to say, like, this is a thing that I enjoy. Because if there's a bad episode, it doesn't ruin the series for me. I think part of what makes The Prisoner what makes The Prisoner less sticky is that it has the problems both of, it kind of has the problems of both serial and episodic stuff, right? Where there is an ongoing story. But it's also like, as we have seen with No Memory Brendan sitting down to watch an episode, you kind of don't know what's going to happen week to week in The Prisoner, right? Anything might wind up happening. He might just go home that week. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at, where it's like, it exists at such a strange precipice at so early a time when TV was starting to become more like a soap opera and more of an ongoing storyline kind of thing, that it kind of has the difficulty of having to solve for both sets of problems.
For me, I think that's definitely where I'm landing on it with the shape of a Columbo episode, and what it's asking of a viewer is not very much, right? Like we've talked about how it trusts people watching to follow along a little bit, and kind of, you don't have to explain absolutely everything. But fundamentally, you could miss large portions of an episode of Columbo, and if you're there for the final 5 minutes, you'll kind of understand what happened. It has the drawing room Poirot explanation of the mystery. I've only seen 3 episodes of The Prisoner, but it is so bizarre in form and content, right? Like, yes, he's trying to escape, and he is, in a magical realist way, like brought back to the village. But as soon as, I think for me, watching the first episode of The Prisoner, where, kind of broadly understanding what the premise was, and then as soon as you see Rover, and you're like, oh, this is actually in a very different mode than I was originally thinking. And now, like, all bets are off on what can happen. And so it's asking a lot more of a viewer to make connections and understand what's going on and theorize, which I think why, like, yes, Columbo is more popular, but the depth of Prisoner fandom is probably a lot deeper in interpretation and theory and that sort of thing, which I think is also why it's so compelling now, where, like, yeah, I've enjoyed watching Columbo because it's nice. It's something nice to put on while we're eating dinner. But, The Prisoner is something I will think about a lot more than any individual episode of Columbo, for sure.
Yeah, I think those are great points, right? I broadly agree. I do think that there's a bit of depth to the Columbo fandom, right? Particularly around, because Columbo is such a mystery himself.
Oh,
right?
sure.
That's true.
I can imagine, like I said, I've not seen the show before this, and I haven't really engaged with that. Matthew's been sending me so many memes that he's been saving, because I didn't have the appreciation for them until now. But yeah, I have to imagine that if this is your thing, that there's a pleasure in combing through and going like, Columbo says this about his kids in this episode, and if we assume that happens in this year, then so on and so forth, where you can almost, in the same way as trying to figure things out about number 6, riddle those things out and, like, piece together your own reading, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the impression I get, though, is, and I'm pretty early in The Prisoner, so I might be wrong, but it feels like a few episodes into The Prisoner, they know what they're doing and they're teasing it out. I know that's not 100% true for sure, but it feels like it has a coherent mystery under the hood. Whereas, does Columbo have kids? Doesn't matter,
right?
And changes frequently enough. And it's like, even him being Italian really does not come up very often until it extremely does. I am not expecting a giant reveal at the end of The Prisoner for sure, though, because I think I would be disappointed.
He was Italian the whole time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we'll see. There is the one of the episodes you suggested to Brendan, the Any Old Port in the Storm, where he only takes a case because the guy's Italian.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true.
I don't remember that.
He sees a picture of him. And he's blonde and blue eyed. And he's like, "Is this guy really Italian?" And the guy's girlfriend is like, "Oh, he's from this part of Italy." And he's like, "Oh yeah, they make him blonde there." Anyway,
Cool. Great.
Yeah, it's cool. And I mean, there's even more than the does he have kids or not? Like, what is the truth of Columbo's character is really interesting, right? In terms of is he playing or is he not? Like, even in this last episode, right? I'm sort of glad we watched it just for this. We see him learn something one way, and then he just lies to the murderer about how he learned it in the very next scene, including inventing details about that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's, you can then take that and do like this post hoc analysis of like, OK, all the times he said that stuff about his family that's inconsistent or doesn't make sense. Now we have a reason for that. It's part of this character. Right. Sure. Of this like Italian guy with a million cousins and a million brother-in-laws or whatever.
The brother-in-law is like the most stable fixture of his family life, I guess, besides his wife.
Yeah. So, yeah, anyway. I think there's a bunch of stuff that you can dig into, but I completely agree that it's a shallower dig possible before you.
Sure.
But what a quarry.
Oh, what a quarry! It goes on for miles.
Yeah. Rather than going on and on, let us proceed to number one with a bullet. Your standout performance, moment, scene, prop, just something from this set of episodes that will stick with you. Nick, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. By far this is my wife's favorite music. I know. And it's so good. It's the most like, oh man, they're playing together. Like they're dueling in like the theater of the spycraft. And his just bizarre, the way he says mahjong and all that. Like none of the rest of that scene. Oh, right. Sorry, there's a detail in that scene as well because, he has access to Cuban cigars, right? And so he gives Columbo a really nice cigar. Yep. And he says the Bay of Pigs wasn't all a disaster, which I thought about for longer than 2 seconds, which is more than that line deserves. But I guess, would that mean that like one of the people of the Bay of Pigs got some cigars and then brought it back to Florida or something? It really doesn't make sense. No. But yeah, This Is Your Wife's Favorite music was really, really good. There's a lot of, I like the CIA Dad a lot.
CIA Dad is also very good.
Lots of good little details.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Matthew, how about you?
Oh, this is tough. Is it
tough because you are also going to say, I know?
Yes, actually. Now I have to come up with a second one.
Well, you do that while I...
Please.
Say that I was also going to say that was my number one with a bullet. I know.
So
I know.
I do have a second scene. It's from that episode, and it is before even we get Brenner showing up, the scene of Columbo trying to pay for gas.
God, that was funny.
It's so funny. Just like taking bits.
The gas tank is accessible through the tail light of the Peugeot, which
and someone else is filling his tank, and he's like, "How much do you want?" And he's like, finding more money, and he's just like, "Keep it running. I can give you.
Keep it running."
God, it's good.
So funny.
Yeah.
And then somebody just from off screen hands him a $10 bill, which is a massive amount of money at that time.
Yeah, $40,000 worth of gas.
And more generally, I think in that episode, I was saying it earlier, but like, I maybe it's wrong to say that Brenner wants to get caught here, but Brenner strikes me as somebody who's so bored. Like he's so bored with his life.
Yes.
Like he's doing all these things and he's so bored. And like Columbo's actually interesting to him. And it feels like the first time he's been engaged in a while. Right?
Even like every conversation he has with the CIA dad is just like whatever. Like it's not like he's not given work to do. And he's just kind of, he seems like he's plateaued. Like he's hit the top of the spycraft hierarchy, and yeah.
One other note I wanted to make. Sorry, this is from way earlier. I should have noted this. An Agenda for Murder, Amir, who's the dry cleaning guy. This is the guy who they cast for Jensen in Iron Man. He's the guy in the cave with Robert Downey Jr. in the first Iron Man movie.
with the box of scraps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not the
so I
guy
just thought that was fun.
Not the guy that gets yelled at for the box of scraps, but in the actual cave with the box of scraps.
In the actual cave, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, small world.
Marvel absorbs everything, I guess.
Yeah.
That's great.
When are they going to reboot Columbo and add him to the Avengers?
I think it'd look a little something like this.
Do you have a number one with a bullet, Brendan? Or are you happy to just double up?
No, like I said, that confrontation and that line read was just so good. But here's the thing. I would watch a whole 3-hour movie of Leslie Nielsen and Patrick McGoohan doing spy shit.
True.
That whole opening act to Identity Crisis was so good. Them just in their 70s outfits. And then, in particular, there's a line read where Melville, played by Otis Young, down on the beach, is the representative for Steinmetz, and he's saying the price is $30,000, and Leslie Nielsen's character says $325. I want something for myself, and Melville says, "I'll tell him $350, and then we'll both be healthy." That's great.
There's an alternate universe where Mission Impossible is just Leslie Nielsen and Patrick McGoohan.
If only.
As a film series, and I would have loved that so much.
I would love that, but let's find out if we love this. How do you rate all of Columbo?
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Matthew, let's hear it.
I really like Columbo. I didn't mention this episode, but the thing that Columbo as a character reminds me the most is my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad, who passed away some time ago, but had nearly the same affect as Peter Falk, who had nearly the same sense of humor, right? Including some off-color jokes he would make, who had the same sort of like tendency to get distracted by like a belly dancer or something like that.
Who among us?
And so, like, especially when he's older in like the 90s, right? He just like, I can't help but see my grandpa on screen, which is a wild thing. But I have to say that Columbo only really has, some number of good seasons before it gets bad. I'm going to call this 5 out of 9 seasons of Columbo.
Sure. That's a reasonable rating to give. Nick, how about you?
If I could split 70s and 90s Columbo, I would give a different answer, but unfortunately, taken all together, it'll have to be 7 out of $10 in Parmesan cheese.
That's pretty good. I likewise feel like there might still be something there in the 70s where the 90s is not delivering. I'm going to give this 70 out of 90 handfuls of grapes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nick, thank you so much for joining us to talk about The Prisoner.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about The Prisoner. I enjoyed all my homework immensely.
Glad to hear it and glad to have you.
Where can people find you on the internet? Do you have anything to plug? Anything people should follow?
Yeah, so you can find me on Blue Sky at Nic Tringali. That's probably the best way to find me and all the things I do. I make video games, making a game called Amber Spire right now, which you can go wishlist, which is a city builder. I also make little card games. I do design, blogging. All of that can probably be found from Blue Sky.
When is this coming out?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Do y'all have an announcement?
No, we don't.
And you're getting married.
Yay!
Woo!
This episode will come out March 1st.
Ooh, that might.
I think we could say it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to say it?
Go for it.
Sure. So, and separately, Brandon and I have just started a podcast called Paper Labyrinths, which is conversations with game designers and people who make and think about games and how different weird little disciplines of games intersect and overlap with each other.
It's a lot of fun, and it should be out now. And if it's not out now, you won't have heard what was just said because I will have cut it out.
Exactly.
Find that wherever you find podcasts.
I'm looking forward to listening to that.
Yeah, should be fun. You can find me and all of the stuff that I do at BrendanMcLeod.com on Bisky or at BrendanMcLeod.dev. Matthew, where can people find you?
I'm Matthew Guz at Bisky.
You can find our artist at cyfsweetman.card.co. You can find our musician at devindecibel.bandcamp.com. You can find us at the-prisoners-dilemma.com, where next time we will return to the village.
And we're just going to return to the village?
Or next time we will return to the... here's the thing.
Yeah.
I had looked up what it was, and then I thought, in the moment... no. You know what? No, I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to do it.
Okay.
Where next
You
time...
can spoil it for me.
Where next time we will, as Columbo said, return to the village in It's Your Funeral. This is a joke because that's the last thing that Columbo says in Ashes to Ashes. Because he's arresting the mortician, and he's like, it's your funeral.
How ironic.
It is.
It
Well,
all connects.
maybe he knew.
Yeah, Columbo knew. He was knew we were going to be doing this.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, it's a temporal pincer movement.
Jesus.
That's right.
Brendan, I'll be seeing you.
Not if I see you first.